Welcome everybody to the October Intuity Tech Talk. I'm Pete Bartz, System Engineer at Intuity, and also with me today are my colleagues Larry Balon, also System Engineer, and John Diamond, the Intuity Product Manager. We'll be your hosts for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So Tech Talks, as most of you know, are designed for our customers and technical members of our authorized partner community. The goal of the sessions is to focus on technical areas of the product that customers may not have experienced yet. These sessions are recorded and they're available on demand from the Intuity YouTube Center. They're a good resource for learning more about the product or reviewing features that you may be interested in implementing. Just a few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. The call's on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. Feel free to ask any questions at any time via the chat panel. We'll have time at the end to take questions that have been posted. So with that, let's get started. Today, we'll be using Intuity 16.5 Patch 2. By the way, if you have any questions on this release, please don't hesitate to contact your Intuity system engineer. We're more than happy to discuss the new contents, from the BMC dashboard integration to all of the new enhancements that make monitoring your network more efficient and effective. So in today's session, we're going to focus on the Intuity Event Management System and a number of methods that you can use to customize email notifications for both events and incidents in your environment. We've also got some time that we're going to spend to discuss how to leverage and extend some of the EMS rule capabilities that you might not be familiar with. So we've got a packed session, so with that, I'll turn it over to Larry to get us started.
Thank you, Pete. Before I go and share out my screen, so I'm going to demonstrate two use cases today. These are use cases that are common and do cause customers, I wouldn't say problems, but it's a little bit challenging. One of them is to set up an EMS rule to email an event. So we'll cover that as part of the demonstration. And then another common use case for our event management system is to create hold-off conditions where you may want to be alerted about a condition in your network, but you want to make sure that that condition is lingering and it's not a transient spike. So we'll cover both of those later on in the demonstration. So with that, I'm going to share out my screen, and we'll go over to a system I have running. And before I actually get into the event management system and the rules, I just want to remind everybody that there is a second way that events can be emailed, and that is through the Preferences tab. There's an Event and Incidents tab within the Preferences panel that allows users to create event conditions and allow them to email events without having to access the event administration function of the software, and that also requires permissioning as well. I'm going to bring this up very quickly. So this is a way, this is more broadly filtered than the EMS way of doing the rule itself. When you do the rule through the event management system, you can be more fine-grained. You can limit it to a specific view. You can limit it to a severity and above. And there are also some other time of day restrictions that you can configure here. The other thing I want to mention is this is the way that you test the email or the connection to your email server. So there's no function to do this within the event management system. Typically, you want to do this shortly after you set up the server and configure the connection to the email server. I'm just going to send a test email. You don't have to save this event notification configuration. You can bring up a new event notification configuration and just put a recipient's address in here. Click the button to send the mail. There'll be a little pop-up window. I click this button. If the connection is good and the email's been sent, you'll get a pop-up box indicating that. If the email is not sent or the Intuity server cannot contact the email server to send the email, you'll get a message as well. So there are several several conditions that may result in an email not being sent. The email server may require credentials that weren't configured when you configure the email connection. There could be devices that need their ACLs configured to allow SMTP traffic. And there also could be rules on the actual email server itself as to who is allowed to access it to be used as a relay. But this is the way that you would test it. I've tested the connection. Now we're going to go on to the event management system. I'm going to bring up the summary page first and talk a little bit about how events get processed through our event management system. So on the left-hand side, that's how events come into Intuity and into the event management system. So there are system events. These are typically events that we poll for. And if I go to the events tab here, I'll bring up a list. There's over 300 out-of-the-box event types, and they're labeled as system. I won't cover them all here, but there's a very large number of events that are out of the box. We can take in traps, SNMP traps. We can take in syslog messages. You can utilize our user-defined poller to create and poll for specific information and metrics that we wouldn't normally poll with our standard device files. And you can create events and thresholds associated with those custom poller events, or you can just create your own event types as well, just by configuring that through the web UI. This comes in to the pre-storage stage where events are processed before they're actually stored in the database. And I'll cover off on that as well, because one of the examples with the hold off that I'm going to use is going to work on those events before they're stored in the database. Then it goes on to post-storage rules. These become incidents, and then the incident can be processed, and typically an incident is processed using a trigger. And there is a difference between event processing and incident processing. So as an example, there are events associated with port utilization. So you have two conditions. There's a threshold crossing event, port utilization threshold crossed for a high or a low, and then there's a clearing a condition associated with that event. Incidents can have more than one of those two states. An incident can be open, it can be closed, it can be reopened, and it can be expired. The other difference is that an incident can be a result of more than one event. And the one I'm going to pick on in this is the port utilization abnormality. So if I highlight this particular incident and edit it, you'll see that for a ROR event, more than one ROR event condition can cause this event to be displayed. And then you'd have to go into the details field to see whether it was a high threshold crossing event or a low threshold crossing event. And then the incident is closed by a clearing condition. And then you can see here there's an age out and there's also an expiration as well as to when the event will expire. So that's the biggest difference between those. I'm going to go now into the rules section, and we'll configure an actual rule to send an email. So this is going to be a pre-storage rule. I've already created a category to email events, and I'll click Add Rule. It's going to be a generic type rule, and I'm just going to call this Email Intuity Event as the name. You can optionally assign a description to this. The name is a requirement, and then you can set conditions. The default is none, which means if I were to set this condition, any event that was received, if I choose the action send email, is going to be sent. But I am going to apply a condition to it. There are two condition types that you can apply. all tests must succeed, which is a logical and. So if you have 2 or more conditions that you configure, if you use the all tests must succeed condition, then all of the conditions must be met before the action step is taken. The other one is at least one test must succeed, and that basically is a logical or. So if you have 2 or more conditions, if at least one of those is met, it will go on to the action step. So for the purposes of our demo today, I'm just going to select all tests must succeed. I'm only going to add a single condition here, and I'm going to select a view membership test. And you'll notice here that there's a username that's grayed out as part of this test. So when you create rules, the rules are actually tied to a user of the system. And the reason I mention this is because if you have a user that is allowed access to create EMS rules, and that user happens to leave the company and you remove their account from the system, that rule is no longer going to work because it's tied to a specific user. The other condition that would cause this would be if you were to go from, for example, internal authentication to external authentication. Any rules that were created using the internally authenticated users would not work once you went to external authentication. So it's just a heads up. So I'm going to pick a view membership test. The view I'm going to pick is this subnet. If I wanted to restrict which events meet this condition, I can do it through a view filter, and then I wouldn't have to come in and change the rules. Or I can also add a second condition saying that I can bring up my events and I can select specific event types. For this demo, we're going to keep it at event type test, and then I'll pick an action. And the action that we're going to pick is send email. And you'll see here there are 4 parameters that need to be configured. There is a recipient's field, so I just highlight that and I click the set button. This is important. These fields need to be enclosed within either single or double quotes, or when you deploy the project, it's going to cause an error and it'll point you to where the error is. So I'm going to use myself as the email recipient. The other thing that you can also do is if you're constantly changing the members of the group, you can change it or configure it as a variable. So this does not necessarily have to be an email address. The value can point to a variable that you've created. I'm going to assign a subject. Again, the subject of the email, again, has to be enclosed in quotes. And I'll just assign some text to that. And then the body is null. And this is the one I think that gives our customers, and even myself, the most problems. So I set this whole value is blank. So there is a section in the System Administrator's Guide, and you'll see it's on page 438, that gives a sample body of the email and how to do that. So what's in double quotes will be printed in the body of the email, followed by this, which is the source of the event. The /n is the new line. Next will be the source name, the component ID string, and you can manipulate this to have as much or as little information as you want. I've already got one that I've got into a notepad window, and I'll just copy this into the body. And what I'm going to send as part of the body is the event type, the severity, the source of the event, the source name, and then the reason. And just to let everybody know, the reason is actually the detail field of the event. So most customers are going to want to do that. I'll click that, And the last thing you need to set is the throttle condition. It is by default set to true, and basically this is just to reduce the traffic between the Intuity server and the email server that it's connected to. If throttle is set to true, the Intuity server will bundle groups of events and send them as a single email. The other value that you can set this to is false. And if I set it to false, every time an event is generated or an event that meets the condition, it will send it. So I'll click OK again, and you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, I have to deploy the project. So I'll just assign a friendly name to the project. And I'll click OK, and then that project will be deployed. And now an event that meets that condition, and it shows up in that particular view, should result in an event being received in my inbox. The second use case we're going to cover very quickly here is the holdback. And what we call that at Intuity is N of M. There are some default conditions or specific event types for holdback. We'll pick on the processor utilization. You see here blue, that means that this particular rule is not enabled. I can enable it by clicking the checkbox here. But this is a very broad rule. This rule basically will apply to every single device. So this will apply to all the devices that are under management, and then there's a release condition here, which I'll get into in a minute, but it'll apply to every single device. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule from scratch, an N of M rule from scratch. I'm going to put it into this folder. So to put it in a specific folder, I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to add a new rule. The rule type is N of M, and I'm going to apply this to a single device. And I'm going to call it a hold off. And I'm going to use CPU utilization, and I'm going to pick a specific device. In this case, one of the devices I'm monitoring is a Cisco 2960. So my condition that I'm going to set is an event attribute test. So there are various portions of an event that are attributes. There's a type, a name, a source, and so forth. And you can also create your own custom attributes. The one that we're going to use is the source name. Then I have to assign an operation. In this case, it's equals. And then I'm going to put this in quotes. I'm going to put the name of that device in here because it's a string. And I click OK. The next thing I need to do is I need to set the release condition. And basically the way that this works is that the event has to be in an open state for more than a certain percentage of time. And that time can be seconds, minutes, hours, or days. So there's a lot of flexibility in how and when you want an event displayed within the event viewer. I'm going to take a simple example. So I'm going to select the events, and the one that I'm going to do as the opening event is average CPU utilization high, and then the closing event will be the clearing condition for that event. So what I want to do is I want to have this event show up if it's in the open condition for 10 minutes. And I picked 10 minutes because that's what our polling cycle is. It's 5-minute intervals. So if this event opens in the next polling cycle, it's open, we're not going to display it. If that condition clears between the first and the second polling cycle, you'll never see the event in the event viewer. But if it is in that open state for 2 polling cycles or 10 minutes, it will be displayed in the event viewer. I just click OK when I'm done. And again, I have to deploy the project, and I'll assign a name to it. And I'll deploy the project. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Pete, who's going to provide some information on some more sophisticated uses of our EMS.
Thanks, Larry. In addition to the examples that we've just seen, let's take a look at some of the other things that you can do with the event management system. These are actually a number of examples that have come from our customers recently, and areas that they're seeing events, they'd like to do some processing with those events, and how can I use the event management system and some rules to better handle and eliminate noise and focus what I'm seeing. The first example is a case where you've got a number of devices at a location, and based on the location attribute for the device, so this is the syslocation field, can I discard a number of events just based on the location? So it's a little bit different than setting up a view and doing view membership condition, because that's another way to approach this. You could set up a rule, you put a test in that says for every port or every device in this view, if you see a port utilization event, go ahead and discard it. This is a little bit different because it extends the condition to leverage like a regex condition against the system location. So the location field and a regex tied together as a condition to actually do a discard. And you could do this for port utilization events. You could do this for things like discards and faults for a specific location as well. Now, the details behind doing this and the details with these 3 examples are things that we'll send you as a follow-up to the call today. So we've got the actual scripts that you can use, that you can plug in. But in this case, the real thing to focus on is the ability to do a regex against not the device name, but an actual different attribute that's part of that event. The second example that we've got is one, again, this came from one of our customers, and that is when I add a device and bring it under management with Intuity, the device might not be QA'd. It might not be fully configured by engineers. It might not be ready to go, but we're bringing it under management to see what's going on. What they'd like to do is discard any events until that device has gone through the rest of its setup. And effectively, this one we've just defined it as once you've added a device, we're going to ignore any events for a day. It's just a time period look. And this is really interesting because this is just a groovy script that you would add in as part of your rule, and we'll send you the details for this. But it allows us to look at the time that the devices come under management. So that's an actual attribute at the device level. You'll see it in the Explorer menu. But based on the time that it was managed, we're going to extend that out and say anything that we see, whether it's a syslog event, a trap, a polled event, for the next day, we're going to ignore it and throw it away. So you can certainly tune the time frame, you can tune the events that you're going to pay attention to, but it's a way to, again, leverage additional attributes and leverage some additional logic to be able to narrow down the things that you're seeing and focus on the things that are really happening. The third example is one that actually came from one of our customers a while ago, and the details behind this are actually in one of our previous Tech Talk sessions. I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's leveraging syslog, and based on the contents and the payload of a syslog message, customize it to actually highlight it. So do a level of enrichment, customize it, and be able to do some additional processing with it. Because a syslog message, whether it's a syslog warning, a syslog error, debug message, the real details behind the syslog is going to be in that payload. So that payload shows up in the details column on the Intuiti event menu, and when you're looking at things like rules, again, the details column ties back to the reason field and the reason attribute for the events. So this is actually customizing a syslog event, taking a piece of the payload, matching on the payload, and customizing it as a new custom event. So the logic behind this is actually leveraging a regex capability again to pull the details out and based on the details assign that to a new customized event, then rewrite those details appropriately. You can reshape the details. You can take a different piece of the details out to add more context to that brand new event that you've customized. So these are just 3 examples that we've got from customers. Again, the specifics behind each one of these are things that we'll send as a follow-up to the call today. The other thing that we'd like to look at is where do I go to find information about setting up rules, setting up some of the additional email features that we've talked about today, and other things about the EMS. Larry pointed to one of the pages in the System Administrator Guide that's actually in Chapter 27 as to how can you format emails and how can you set that up. But I just wanted to throw a few links up here for you to just as a reference point. The first one really is really helpful because it looks at a number of areas of the event management system, and this is it's available to you in the help dialog, the help menus, right within the web interface. So if you go to the help menus in the section, you'll see a whole section of videos, and there's a bunch of stuff about the EMS there. If you're looking specific for help on setting up email, just go to the context help again and type in email in the search button, and you're going to actually see some of the same information. If you want to go back and look at all the event management system stuff that's in the guides, Chapter 27 through 29 is really in the System Admin Guide, the place that you want to look at. And then finally, we've done a number of event management system videos on previous Tech Talks. So to find those, just go to YouTube and search for Intuiti News, or go to Intuiti.com and look at the resources page, and you'll see a link to all of the videos. And there's a bunch of stuff out there, and there's a number of ones that we did a few years ago on the EMS that can be a really great help. So I think with that, let's turn it over to questions. Pat, has anything come in?
Yeah, we got a few, Pete. And the first one is, in the body of the email action, what are the plus signs used for?
Maybe I should jump in on that one. Okay, as with various other fields in the configuration user interface for the event management system, that is an example where the syntax is actually Groovy syntax. Groovy is a language that's derived from Java, and there's a lot of similarities, and this is one of them in that where you have strings, they can be concatenated, put next to each other, using a plus. Now, normally you would think of a plus as being adding numbers together, but when you add strings together, it means concatenating them. So we have one string plus another string, then it will join them together in the final result. And those strings can either be explicitly defined, where you've got a set of characters enclosed within quotes, either single, double quotes, but you can also be calling upon variables or attributes, which is what that example had, where it was taking information that came from the event, like the name of the component, the source name that the event was being raised against, and using that to add it on to another string. So it's a way of just creating text as a long string that will appear within your final email. Okay, Pat.
Thank you, JD. And the next question is, how can I access the IP address of the device that is being polled to use in one of my rules?
Okay. That brings up a very interesting aspect of the way that these rules, and particularly those scripts that we've just been talking about, can take advantage of them. The event has with it a set of attributes, and in fact, at one point, Larry showed you a set of the attributes associated with the event, and they correspond basically to the columns that you would see in the event viewer. So the name of the event, the name of the component that was raising the event, the severity, the details, which is actually called reason, and various other bits and pieces are available as separate attributes that you can then use, just like we've been talking about a moment ago, to build up the strings that you may want to incorporate into emails or use for other purposes or use within a conditional test. And there's another bit in there called source, which is an attribute, but it's actually an object. In programming terms, what that means is that it gives you access into the database for all of the attributes associated with that component. If that component were a device, then saying source dot dev polled IP, which is the name of the attribute that holds the IP address by which we are polling the device, that will give you access to it. So it's dipped into the database, pulled it back, and then you can just use it as a variable within programming. And if you need a list of all of the attributes that are available for all manner of different types of component, like devices and ports, then that's all documented online in the product. If you go to the Help menu, then one of the options is the Data Dictionary, and that gives you a list of all of the components and all of the attributes that are available for them with the name to use for them.
Okay, JD, that's it, Pete.
Sounds good. Thanks, Pat. So if you think of any questions after we're done with the session today, go ahead and email us. Just send email to tech.talks@intuiti.com. And if you've got any other questions, or if you've even got topics that you'd like to suggest for future Tech Talks, just shoot us a note. That'd be great. So let's see, a quick reminder. If you haven't signed up yet, the Intuiti Training Academy is available for your information and your reference. Sign up today and take advantage of this portal. The sign-up form is found on Intuiti.com. Just take a look at the login area at the top banner of the home page. Our next Tech Talk is scheduled for November 15th, and the topic for this one is configuration management. Please make a note of this on your calendar, and we hope that you'll be able to attend it. Invitations will be forthcoming as we get a little bit closer to the date. Our trade shows and event season is upon us as well, and if you plan to attend any of the following events, stop by our stand and give us an opportunity to meet you in person and catch up. We'd enjoy the chance to hear what your plans are for the future. Now, a couple of the dates to highlight, you'll see actually the BMC Exchange New York City event, which is actually happening tomorrow. And there's a number of other events, on kind of worldwide events that we've got set up, and then finally wrapping it up with the BMC Exchange event in London on November 14th. So to wrap up today, we'll send you a video link of the presentation, and if you have any questions about the content or would like personal demonstration, please be sure to contact your Intuiti system engineer. So thanks for attending, everybody. We hope to see you on November 15th for the next Tech Talk, or perhaps in person at a BMC event. Have a great rest of the week.